Welcome to Life Stories, where we share heartfelt tales of resilience, love, and the human spirit. In today's story, we follow Emma, a determined single mother who rises above heartbreak and betrayal to create a life of purpose and hope for her son, Caleb. From the heartbreak of abandonment to the triumph of opening a center dedicated to helping children in need, Emma's journey is one of strength, redemption, and the power of never giving up. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel to start today's inspiring story. Let's dive into Emma's incredible journey. The skyline of Chicago shimmered outside the floor-to-ceiling windows of Emma's apartment, each twinkling light a quiet reminder of life bustling in the city below. Emma stood still, the pregnancy test in her hand trembling slightly as her heart raced with an overwhelming mix of emotions: excitement, fear, uncertainty. Tonight, everything would change. For the past 3 years, she had built a life with Lucas, a man of sharp ambition and unrelenting focus. Together, they had carved out a version of happiness amid his late nights at work, the endless phone calls, and business meetings. He often described his job as demanding, but it was also one of his greatest loves. Emma had always understood that Lucas's world revolved around success, ambition, and making the right connections. Still, tonight, she imagined it would all be different. Tonight, they had something new to celebrate, a heartbeat growing within her. She glanced at the clock. Its rhythmic ticking was almost hypnotic, reminding her how quickly time was slipping away. Lucas was already an hour late. Late nights weren't unusual for him, she reminded herself. He often came home drained from meetings that bled into late dinners with investors. Tonight, though, she had hoped he'd break the pattern. After all, this news wasn't something she could bear to keep to herself much longer. When the sound of the door unlocking finally broke through the quiet, Emma's heart leapt. Lucas stepped in, his tailored suit pristine as always, his sharp jawline set in that familiar expression of focus, or was it tension? He loosened his tie, barely glancing at her as he dropped his briefcase onto the couch. "You're home," Emma said softly, stepping toward him, her voice trembling with excitement. "Yeah," he replied absent-mindedly, heading straight for the bar cart to pour himself a drink. His indifference made her hesitate. For a moment, she considered waiting. But the news bubbled up within her, too urgent to hold back. "Lucas, I have something to tell you." She tried to steady her voice, but her hands trembled as she held up the test. He turned to face her, his brow furrowing slightly. "Can it wait? It's been a long day." "No, it can't." Emma's voice was firm, though her heart felt like it was beating in her throat. "I'm pregnant." The words hung in the air like a fragile bubble, ready to burst. For a moment, Lucas stared at the test in her hand, his expression unreadable. Then he exhaled sharply, setting his drink down with a deliberate clink. "Emma," he began, his voice low and measured. "I can't do this." Her chest tightened as if the ground beneath her had been ripped away. "What do you mean? You can't do this?" she asked, her voice cracking. Lucas avoided her gaze, his jaw tightening. "The company's expanding. We're moving operations to New York next month. I was going to tell you over dinner. We'll move together." "Then," Emma insisted, her voice rising in disbelief. "Lucas, this is our family now." He shook his head, taking a step back as though the very idea frightened him. "There is no we in this decision. Emma, the merger's already approved. I'm marrying Alexandra next month." The name hit Emma like a physical blow. Alexandra, the daughter of one of his wealthiest investors. Her mind reeled, struggling to connect the dots. "How long has this been going on?" she whispered, her voice hollow. "It's not what you think," Lucas said, his tone cold. "It's business. The merger requires business." Emma cut him off, her laugh bitter and sharp. "I'm carrying your child, and you're talking to me about mergers?" Lucas grabbed his briefcase, his movements brisk and deliberate. "You'll be taken care of," he said flatly. "I'll have my lawyers handle everything." "Your lawyers?" Emma stepped closer, her voice shaking with fury. "Look me in the eye, Lucas, and tell me the last 3 years meant nothing." He hesitated, finally meeting her gaze. But what she saw wasn't guilt, or even regret, it was emptiness. "I'm sorry," he said mechanically, "but I have to go." The door clicked shut behind him, leaving Emma standing alone in the suffocating silence. Tears streamed down her face as she instinctively placed her hand on her stomach. From this moment on, her life would never be the same. She sank into the nearest chair, clutching the pregnancy test like it was the last thread tethering her to reality. The city lights outside blurred through her tear-streaked vision. And for the first time in years, Emma felt utterly untethered. Her phone buzzed on the kitchen counter, breaking the oppressive stillness. For a fleeting moment, she thought it might be Lucas calling to apologize, to tell her he had made a mistake. But when she checked the screen, it was a message from Sarah. "How did it go? Did you tell him?" Emma's fingers hovered over the keyboard. How could she even begin to explain what had just happened? That Lucas had chosen power and wealth over their family, leaving her and their unborn child behind without a second thought? After a long pause, she typed a single word: "Gone." Her body trembled as she rushed to the bathroom, nausea overtaking her. She barely made it to the sink before vomiting, the physical sickness mirroring the anguish rolling through her. When she finally lifted her head, her reflection in the mirror was unrecognizable, pale, tear-streaked, and hollow. "This isn't who I am," she whispered hoarsely, gripping the edge of the counter. "I'm stronger than this." Drawing a shaky breath, she splashed cold water on her face. Her eyes fell on the test resting on the counter, its 2 pink lines blurred by stray droplets of water. She picked it up carefully, staring at it for a long moment before slipping it into her pocket. This wasn't just a test. It was evidence of the life growing inside her, the reason she couldn't let Lucas's betrayal define her. For her child, she would rise. She had no choice but to rebuild, no matter how shattered she felt. And as the Chicago skyline sparkled outside, Emma vowed she would create a new life, one filled with love, hope, and resilience. The early morning light filtered through the blinds in Sarah's guest room, casting soft patterns on the warm yellow walls. Emma stirred from a restless sleep, her body heavy with exhaustion but her mind unwilling to stop replaying the events of the previous night. Lucas's words echoed in her head, each one a dagger that cut deeper. But there was no time to dwell. She couldn't afford the luxury of falling apart. Not now. Not when someone else depended on her. From the kitchen, the faint aroma of coffee wafted through the air, pulling Emma from her thoughts. She shuffled into the living room, where Sarah was bustling around, her hair tied back in a messy bun and her scrubs slightly wrinkled. Emma took a seat at the counter, her hands wrapping around the warm mug Sarah placed in front of her without a word. "Thanks," Emma said softly, her voice still hoarse from the tears she'd cried the night before. Sarah leaned against the counter, her arms crossed, her eyes scanning Emma's face carefully. "You don't have to talk about it," she said gently. "But if you want to, I'm here." Emma hesitated, staring into her coffee as if it might hold answers to questions she couldn't even form. "He's gone," she said finally, her voice steady despite the weight of the words. "He's marrying someone else next month." He didn't even hesitate. Sarah's jaw tightened, her frustration evident. But she said nothing at first. Instead, she reached across the counter, placing a hand on Emma's. "You don't have to do this alone. You know, you've got me. And you've got this baby to fight for. You're stronger than him, Emma. You always have been." Emma nodded. But the enormity of what lay ahead still loomed large in her mind. Balancing her demanding career as a pediatric surgeon while navigating the uncertainty of single motherhood felt insurmountable. "It just feels like too much," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "It's not," Sarah replied firmly. And you're going to prove it. Like you always do. The clock on the wall caught Emma's eye, snapping her back to reality. She had a shift at the hospital in less than an hour. As much as she wanted to curl up and let the world fade away, she knew she couldn't. Her patients needed her. And if she let herself slip now, it wouldn't just be her future at stake, it would be her child's, too. By the time Emma arrived at St. Joseph's Hospital, the familiar hum of activity was already in full swing. Nurses and doctors bustled through the halls, their hurried footsteps echoing off the sterile walls. Emma's white coat felt heavier than usual as she slipped it on, but the weight served as a reminder of her purpose. Morning. Dr. Collins. Jacob Rivera, one of the senior nurses, called out as he approached her. His easygoing demeanor always carried an undercurrent of deep compassion. You look like you've been through it. Rough night. You could say that. Emma replied, forcing a small smile. What's on the schedule? Jacob handed her a clipboard. We've got a pediatric case in the OR. 5-year-old with a ruptured appendix. Dr. Lassiter asked for you specifically. Emma nodded, grateful for the distraction. Surgery demanded her complete focus, offering a brief reprieve from the chaos of her personal life. As she scrubbed in, the weight on her chest began to lift slightly. Here, in the OR, she could channel all her energy into saving lives. The procedure was more complicated than anticipated, the child's condition deteriorating midway through. Suction here, Emma instructed, her voice calm but firm. Minutes stretched into an hour. But by the time she placed the final suture, the child's vitals had stabilized. Relief swept over her like a wave. As the surgical team moved the patient to recovery, Emma peeled off her gloves and stepped into the hallway. The adrenaline that had kept her steady began to ebb, replaced by a deep exhaustion. Jacob joined her, leaning casually against the wall. Another life saved by Dr. Collins, he said with a grin, though his eyes held genuine admiration. No big deal. Emma managed a small laugh, shaking her head. It's a team effort. You're part of it, too. Well, don't expect me to keep this praise up. I've got a reputation to maintain, Jacob teased before heading back toward the nurse's station. The levity of the moment didn't last long. Emma's phone buzzed in her pocket, and when she glanced at the screen, it was a reminder for her first ultrasound appointment. She hadn't allowed herself to think about the baby much since last night, pushing the emotions aside to get through the day. Now, though, the reality felt inescapable. During her lunch break, Sarah accompanied her to the OB/GYN department. The mood between them shifted to a quiet solemnity as Emma lay back on the examination table. Her pulse quickened as the technician prepared the equipment. All right. Let's take a look, the technician said, her tone professional yet kind. The room filled with the sound of the ultrasound machine. And moments later, a rhythmic thumping echoed through the space. There's your baby, the technician said, pointing to the screen. Emma's breath hitched as her eyes locked onto the tiny flickering heartbeat on the monitor. She hadn't expected the flood of emotion that followed. Tears welled in her eyes. But this time, they weren't from pain, they were from hope. Beside her, Sarah placed a comforting hand on Emma's shoulder. You've got this, she whispered. You're going to be an incredible mom. Emma wiped her eyes, her resolve hardening. I have to be, she said quietly, her voice steady. As she left the clinic that day, Emma felt a flicker of something she hadn't in a long time, determination. For her baby, she would fight. For herself, she would rebuild. One step at a time. Emma's contractions began during her shift at St. Joseph's Hospital. At first, she dismissed the sharp twinges in her lower abdomen as Braxton Hicks contractions, just her body's way of preparing for the big day. But as the hours dragged on, the discomfort deepened into a steady, rhythmic pain that could no longer be ignored. She was in the middle of reviewing charts when the wave of intensity forced her to grip the edge of the desk for support. Emma, are you okay? Sarah's voice was sharp with concern as she rushed to her side. I think this is it. Emma managed, her breath catching as another contraction rippled through her body. Without hesitation, Sarah took control. You're done for the day. Let's get you upstairs. Emma protested weakly, her sense of duty warring with her physical state. I can finish. No, you can't. Sarah cut her off. Stop pretending you're invincible. You're about to meet your baby, and that's the only thing that matters right now. Emma surrendered to her friend's unwavering resolve. Within minutes, she was wheeled into the maternity ward, her heart racing faster than her contractions. The sterile white walls of the delivery room blurred as a team of nurses worked around her, their movements swift and efficient. As the pain intensified, Emma clenched her fists, her breath coming in short gasps. She wasn't prepared for this, not like this. Not alone. The enormity of the moment pressed down on her, and for a fleeting second, she felt a pang of resentment toward Lucas for abandoning her at such a vulnerable time. Breathe, Emma, Sarah said, gripping her hand tightly. Deep breaths, in and out. You've got this. Emma nodded, drawing strength from her friend's presence. The nurse by her side adjusted the fore and offered calm words of encouragement. You're doing great, Dr. Collins. Just a little longer. A fresh wave of pain crashed over her, and Emma groaned through clenched teeth. I can't do this, she gasped, her body trembling. Yes, you can, Sarah countered, her voice firm and unwavering. You're the strongest person I know, and you're about to meet the reason why you're doing all of this. Those words anchored Emma in a way nothing else could. She focused on the life she was about to bring into the world, the tiny heartbeat that had given her hope on the darkest of nights. She pushed through the pain, her mind filled with flashes of all that had led her to this moment, Lucas walking out, her struggles to rebuild, the unwavering support of Sarah and her colleagues. This was her moment, and she wouldn't let fear define it. All right, Emma, the obstetrician said, her voice steady but filled with urgency. One more big push, and we'll have your baby. Time seemed to stretch endlessly as Emma summoned every ounce of strength she had left. The room was filled with the hum of activity, but her focus was singular. And then, like a sudden release of tension, a piercing cry filled the room. It's a boy, the doctor announced with a warm smile, carefully placing the squirming, wriggling bundle on Emma's chest. Emma's breath caught as she looked down at her son for the first time. His tiny face was scrunched in a mix of confusion and determination. His cries loud and healthy. Tears streamed down her face as she cradled him close, overwhelmed by the fierce, protective love that surged through her. Caleb, she whispered, brushing her fingers against his soft cheek. Welcome to the world. Beside her, Sarah wiped away her own tears. His perfect. Emma. Absolutely perfect. Emma barely noticed the flurry of activity around her as the nurses worked to clean and monitor Caleb. All she could see was him, his tiny hands, his delicate features, his absolute perfection. For the first time in months, the weight of uncertainty and fear lifted. In its place was a sense of purpose so strong it was almost unshakable. As the nurses wheeled Caleb away for routine tests, Emma hesitated, reluctant to let him go even for a moment. Sensing her unease, Sarah stepped in. I'll go with him, she said softly. I'll make sure they take extra good care of him. Thank you, Emma murmured, her voice filled with gratitude. When Caleb was placed back in her arms, Emma felt a profound shift within herself. She wasn't the same woman she had been just hours earlier. The hurt and betrayal Lucas had left in his wake still lingered, but it no longer consumed her. She had Caleb now, and with him came a renewed sense of hope. As she gazed at her son, his tiny hand curling around her finger, Emma made a silent promise. She would give him a life filled with love, strength, and opportunities. Whatever challenges lay ahead, she would face them head-on for Caleb, and for the future they would build together. The days following Caleb's birth blurred together in a haze of sleepless nights and quiet moments of awe. Emma marveled at every little detail: his tiny fingers, the way his lips pursed when he slept, and the warmth of his small body nestled against hers. Despite her exhaustion, she found herself watching him for hours, as though memorizing every inch of the miracle she had created. Caleb was her world now, and every decision she made revolved around him. But as much as she wanted to savor the early days of motherhood, reality demanded her attention. Bills still needed to be paid. Shifts at the hospital awaited. And the quiet ache of Lucas's absence lingered in the background. Emma wasn't sure she missed him. Exactly. What she mourned was the life she had imagined for Caleb, a life with two parents, shared laughter, and the security of a whole family. That dream was gone now. And in its place, she had to build something new. Fortunately, Sarah was an unwavering source of support. When Emma returned home from the hospital, Sarah had already transformed the spare room into a cozy nursery. The walls were painted a soft grey, adorned with whimsical animal decals, and a crib sat ready by the window. "I know it's not much," Sarah had said, brushing off Emma's gratitude, "but Caleb deserves a space that's just his." Emma leaned heavily on Sarah in those early weeks, grateful for her presence. On days when exhaustion overwhelmed her, Sarah would step in without hesitation, soothing Caleb with practiced ease while Emma caught a precious few hours of sleep. "You're not alone," Sarah would remind her whenever the weight of single parenthood threatened to pull her under. "You've got me. And we've got him. That's all we need." Caleb grew quickly, his wide brown eyes bright with curiosity. By the time he was 6 months old, he was babbling non-stop, his tiny hands constantly reaching for the world around him. Emma found joy in his milestones, each one a reminder that they were moving forward. Yet, no matter how much love and stability she provided, the specter of Lucas's absence loomed. One afternoon, as Emma sifted through a pile of medical journals at the kitchen table, her phone buzzed. She glanced at the screen, her breath catching when she saw Lucas's name. Her initial instinct was to ignore the call, but curiosity and a sliver of unresolved anger got the better of her. "Emma." Lucas's voice was cautious, almost hesitant. "I've been thinking a lot about everything. About Caleb. I want to see him." Emma's grip on the phone tightened. "It's been months, Lucas. Months without a single word from you. Now you suddenly want to be a part of his life. I know I don't deserve your forgiveness," Lucas said, his voice steady but tinged with regret. "But he's my son. I want to do better for him." Emma's heart wavered, torn between anger and the faintest flicker of hope. Could she trust him? Could she let him back into Caleb's life after everything he'd done? But then she thought of Caleb, the way he laughed, the way his eyes lit up when he discovered something new. Didn't he deserve the chance to know his father, even if it was on her terms? "Fine," she said finally, her tone guarded. "But this is about Caleb, not us. And you'll follow my rules." Lucas agreed without hesitation. And Emma hung up, her emotions a turbulent mix of dread and cautious optimism. Over the next few weeks, Lucas began visiting Caleb. At first, he stayed on the periphery, joining Emma and Caleb at the park or sitting quietly during storytime. Caleb, too young to understand the complexities of their history, took to Lucas quickly. His laughter came easily when Lucas played peekaboo or helped him stack blocks. Emma watched from a distance, her emotions conflicted. Lucas's presence was unsettling, a reminder of the pain he had caused. But it was also undeniable that Caleb seemed to enjoy having him around. She couldn't deny that Lucas was trying. He showed up consistently, bringing small, thoughtful gifts for Caleb: a book on animals, a colorful stacking toy. He listened intently when Emma spoke about Caleb's milestones, asking questions that hinted at a genuine interest. Still, Emma kept her guard up. She couldn't forget how Lucas had left. How easily he had discarded their family for the sake of ambition. Trust would take time, and forgiveness might never come. But for Caleb's sake, she was willing to navigate the murky waters of co-parenting. One evening, as Emma put Caleb to bed, she watched Lucas read to him from a storybook. His voice was steady, his expression soft as he pointed out the illustrations to Caleb. For a brief moment, Emma felt a flicker of something she couldn't quite name. It wasn't forgiveness, but it was close, a tiny crack in the walls she had built around her heart. As Lucas quietly closed the book and tucked Caleb in, Emma realized that their journey was far from over. There would be challenges ahead, battles to fight, and wounds to heal. But for now, as Caleb's soft breaths filled the room, Emma allowed herself to believe that they might find a way forward. Not as the family she had once dreamed of, but as something new, something that might just work. The custody papers arrived on a quiet Monday morning, slipped into Emma's mailbox like a bomb waiting to go off. She stared at the envelope in disbelief, her hands trembling as she opened it. Lucas had filed for joint custody of Caleb, the same man who had walked out on her while she was pregnant, who had stayed silent for months, now wanted to share in raising their son. Emma's initial reaction was a mixture of fury and panic. How could Lucas even think he had a right to Caleb after everything? But as the anger subsided, it was replaced by a cold determination. She wasn't going to let him waltz into Caleb's life and disrupt the stability she had worked so hard to create. If Lucas wanted to fight for custody, then he would have to prove he deserved it. Her attorney, Claire Harper, was a sharp, no-nonsense woman with a reputation for winning tough cases. She met Emma in her small but organized office, flipping through the paperwork Lucas's legal team had submitted. "This is going to get messy," Claire warned, her tone matter-of-fact. "But we'll fight. Caleb's best interests are what matter here. And you've been his rock." In the weeks leading up to the hearing, Emma threw herself into preparing her case. She gathered evidence of her role as Caleb's primary caregiver, medical records, photos of milestones, testimony from Sarah and colleagues who had witnessed her dedication. Through it all, Caleb was her anchor, his laughter and curious questions reminding her of why she was doing this. When the day of the hearing arrived, Emma walked into the courtroom with her head held high, though her heart pounded in her chest. Lucas was already there, seated at the defendant's table with his polished attorney by his side. He looked composed, his tailored suit and calm demeanor giving off the impression of a man in control. But Emma noticed the tension in his jaw, the way his hands rested stiffly on the table. He wasn't as unshaken as he appeared. The opening arguments were brutal. Claire painted a clear picture of Emma's unwavering dedication to Caleb, emphasizing how she had provided him with love, stability, and a nurturing environment. In contrast, Lucas's attorney leaned heavily on his client's financial resources and his claim that Caleb deserved the influence of both parents. The first witness called was Sarah. She sat tall in the witness box, her tone firm but empathetic as she described Emma's sacrifices and commitment as a mother. "Emma has always put Caleb first," Sarah said, her voice steady. "She's juggled her demanding career and single motherhood without missing a beat. Caleb thrives because of her." Lucas's attorney tried to undermine Sarah's testimony, pointing out Emma's long hours at the hospital. But Sarah remained composed, countering with examples of how Emma ensured Caleb was always cared for. When the cross-examination ended, Emma felt a surge of gratitude for her friend's unwavering support. Then it was Lucas's turn. He took the stand, speaking earnestly about his regrets and his desire to be part of Caleb's life. "I know I wasn't there when Caleb was born," Lucas admitted, his voice tinged with regret. "But I want to make things right. I want to be the father he deserves." Claire's cross-examination was sharp and unyielding. "Mr. Bennett," she began, her tone calm but piercing, "can you name Caleb's favorite book? His best friend? His favorite food?" Lucas faltered, unable to answer the questions with certainty. The silence was deafening, and Emma felt a pang of vindication. But the most damning evidence came when Claire introduced the findings from an ongoing investigation into Lucas's company. Financial discrepancies, missing funds, and shell companies painted a troubling picture. While Lucas denied involvement, the judge's expression grew more severe with every revelation. During a recess, Lucas approached Emma in the hallway, his expression weary. "I'm not trying to take him from you," he said softly. "I just want to be part of his life." Emma's voice was firm, but not unkind. "Then prove it, Lucas. Not to me, but to Caleb. Show him that he matters more than your career or your ambition." When the hearing resumed, the judge called for both parties to deliver their closing arguments. Claire spoke passionately about Emma's role in Caleb's life, her words striking a chord in the room. Lucas's attorney attempted to counter, but the damage had already been done. As the judge adjourned for the day, Emma left the courtroom with a mix of exhaustion and hope. Sarah and Claire flanked her, their presence a reminder that she wasn't alone in this fight. Caleb was her world, and she would do whatever it took to protect him, no matter how long the battle lasted. Emma was ready. The weeks following the custody hearing passed in a tense limbo, the weight of uncertainty pressing heavily on Emma's shoulders. She tried to keep life as normal as possible for Caleb, filling their days with playtime at the park, bedtime stories, and small moments of joy. Still, the looming decision hung over her like a shadow. One afternoon, Emma found herself seated in a conference room at St. Joseph's Hospital, surrounded by her colleagues and key donors. It was the final meeting before the launch of the Ramsay Center for Pediatric Innovation, a project she had spent years developing. The center was designed to provide cutting-edge care to underserved children, and it had become Emma's way of channeling her pain into something meaningful. As the meeting wrapped up, her phone buzzed. It was a message from Lucas. "I'd like to see Caleb this weekend if that's okay. Let me know what works for you." Emma stared at the text, her emotions a swirl of cautious hope and lingering distrust. He had been consistent in his efforts lately, showing up for Caleb without overstepping. Yet, she couldn't forget the pain he had caused or the uncertainty of his motives. That Saturday, Lucas arrived at Emma's house with a small bouquet of flowers for her and a bright blue toy car for Caleb. Caleb's face lit up as he greeted Lucas with a hug, and Emma couldn't deny the warmth that spread through her chest at the sight. For Caleb's sake, she wanted this to work, wanted him to have a relationship with his father, even if her trust in Lucas remained fragile. "Thank you," she said quietly as Lucas stepped into the living room, "for being consistent." Lucas met her gaze, his expression sincere. "It's the least I can do. I want him to know he can count on me." They spent the afternoon at the park, watching Caleb chase after butterflies and show off his impressive collection of treasures he found along the way: rocks, twigs, and a particularly shiny coin. Lucas was patient, laughing as Caleb tugged him toward the swings and climbed the jungle gym with boundless energy. Emma observed from a distance, her heart caught between the past and the tentative possibility of a new dynamic. Later, as they sat on a park bench watching Caleb play, Lucas turned to her. "Emma, I just want you to know I'm not the same person I was when I left. I've made mistakes, huge ones, but I'm trying to be better. For Caleb. For myself." Emma studied him carefully, searching his face for signs of the arrogance and detachment that had defined him before. Instead, she saw vulnerability, a man grappling with the consequences of his choices. "Actions matter more than words," she said finally, her tone measured. "Keep showing up for him. And maybe, one day, I'll believe you." Lucas nodded, his expression serious. "I will. I promise." The following week brought the grand opening of the Ramsay Center for Pediatric Innovation. The sleek, modern facility was packed with donors, colleagues, and community members, all eager to celebrate the milestone. Emma moved through the crowd, accepting congratulations while keeping her nerves in check. This was her night. the culmination of years of hard work and sacrifice. Toward the back of the room, she spotted Lucas, standing quietly with his hands in his pockets. He hadn't made a grand entrance or sought attention. Instead, he stayed in the background, offering her a small nod when their eyes met. It was a gesture of respect, one that Emma hadn't expected but appreciated. When it was time for Emma to take the stage, the applause was thunderous. She stood at the podium, the logo of the Ramsey Center glowing behind her, and took a deep breath. "Good evening," she began, her voice steady. "Tonight isn't just about celebrating a building. It's about hope. It's about creating a future where every child has access to the care they deserve, regardless of their circumstances." She spoke about Caleb, about how becoming a mother had reshaped her understanding of resilience and purpose. Her voice wavered as she described the challenges she had faced, but it grew stronger when she shared her vision for the center. By the time she finished, the audience rose in a standing ovation. Backstage, Sarah hugged her tightly. "You were incredible," she said, her voice filled with pride. Emma smiled, tears brimming in her eyes. "We did this together." As the night wound down, Emma found herself standing outside the center, the cool night air brushing against her skin. Lucas approached quietly, his hands in his pockets. "You were amazing up there," he said. "Thank you," Emma replied, her voice soft. "And, thank you for coming." Lucas hesitated, then said, "You've built something incredible, Emma. I hope Caleb knows how lucky he is to have you as his mom." Her throat tightened, and for the first time in years, she allowed herself to let go of a little of the bitterness she held toward him. "He's lucky to have both of us," she said. "As long as you keep showing up." Lucas smiled, a genuine warmth in his expression. "I will." As Emma drove home that night, Caleb's laughter still echoing in her mind, she felt a quiet sense of peace. Her journey hadn't been easy, and the challenges weren't over. But she was building a life filled with love and purpose. Whatever lay ahead, she was ready to face it, with Caleb by her side and a future that shone bright with possibility. As Emma tucked Caleb into bed that night, his tiny hand resting on hers, she felt an overwhelming sense of gratitude. Life hadn't unfolded the way she had once imagined, but in its twists and turns, it had given her something far greater, a purpose. A love so profound it redefined her. Lucas's consistent presence was no longer a question mark but a quiet reassurance. A sign that redemption, however slow, was possible. Looking out the window at the Chicago skyline, Emma allowed herself a rare moment of reflection. She had built a life filled with strength, resilience, and unwavering hope, not just for herself but for Caleb and the many children who would benefit from her work. This wasn't just her story, it was a story of transformation and love that conquered betrayal. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more inspiring stories like this one. See you in the next video of Life Stories.